Hamatakyapi, good morning. This is Nick Estes, co-host of the Red Nation podcast. We have a special guest this morning, Camila Escalante, who is the editor of Kawsachun News, as well as the Latin American correspondent for Press TV. Good morning, Camila. Can you tell us where you're at?
Yeah, good morning, Nick. I'm in Buenos Aires, Argentina. I just arrived here this morning, just coming from Bolivia, where I'll be returning in a few days. So we're here to talk about Bolivia. I'm in Argentina because I think it's really important to speak to and cover what's going on here because there's a really important popular struggle against the far-right government, the neoliberal government, a U.S. puppet government of Javier Milei, which is really his policies are going to affect working class people. And although, there are some differences between the situation in Bolivia, I thought it very important that while I'm down here in South America to make the trip, because I think there's a lot that people around the global north can learn from the struggles here in Argentina and, of course, Bolivia.
Well, thanks for joining us this morning. I know you got in really early. And you got up just in time for this live stream, so I really appreciate it. Let's jump right into it. For the last several days, you were following the Bolivian social movements in Via Tunari for a national congress to commemorate and refound. We can talk about what that refoundation means, the political instrument, which was formerly attached to or a part of the MAS, or the Movement Towards Socialism in Bolivia. Can you just talk a little bit about that process of refoundation and what it means in this particular political moment for Bolivia and left movements?
Yeah, so it's a really interesting process that I'm really happy to have been able to accompany, to observe as a journalist, as someone who is really inspired by the social movements and the sophistication of the grassroots and their organization there in Bolivia for many years. I don't know if you could say. I don't know how long you would say. And so I've interviewed over the course of the 3 days of the Congress a lot of the main leaders of the movement towards socialism. That includes people who, or what was formerly the movement towards socialism, the political instrument is what they call it, because the way it's been framed, speaking to these historic leaders in Bolivia, is that I don't know if you can make the photos more full screen. that would be that would be good. But you know, I was speaking to some of the historic leaders there in Bolivia, and the way they framed it is that indigenous people in Bolivia have been fighting against colonialism for 500 years, and that that's the context, is that for hundreds of years they were fighting the colonizers, they were resisting, and within the last 100 years, there was somewhat of a transformation in which indigenous people needed to, for the obvious reasons, compete electorally. They needed to fight back against their governors in Bolivia, and they began to, factor in politically in different ways. Eventually, 30 years ago, they founded the movement towards socialism, and over the last 30 years, those indigenous people, campesinos primarily, but other sometimes urban social movements, were able to win elections to govern over municipalities, to govern over the departments. They held the governor's seats. They still have the majority in the Bolivian Senate today. Came from that movement that was led by Evo Morales, and also a great number of the seats in Congress. And so through the movement towards socialism led by Evo Morales, the political instrument, they were able to take control of the state. They made really profound changes to the state in a period of 14 years when Evo Morales was the president. They made profound changes to the society. And they changed the Bolivian constitution. They refounded the state. Bolivia was a republic, and then they changed it to a plurinational communitarian model. And it was a distinct form of state, which, guarantees, at least in principle, a lot of different rights that you can't find in other constitutions in other countries. Guaranteed rights seen nowhere else in the world. And so all of that was done because the indigenous campesino sectors of the country, which is most Bolivians, are still living in rural areas and still producing on the land, were able to form a political instrument. And so that was founded 30 years ago. That's the movement towards socialism, the MAS IPSP, which is the political instrument for the sovereignty of the peoples. And so this weekend, what took place was a Congress to celebrate those 30 years and the accomplishment under this political instrument, and to also refound it. And they're refounding it because there is a crisis in the country, and there is a split among essentially what are the different left sectors of Bolivia. The current president and government came into power with 55% of the vote, so the majority of Bolivians did vote for this government. However, there's a split between the people who support Evo Morales, and he probably is, or he is, in fact, the politician and the political figure in the country that has the greatest number of support on the left. And then, of course, the government has a much smaller amount of people that has split away with the government. And unfortunately, going towards the elections that right now are set to be held in August, the TSC, which is the electoral authority in the country, has recognized the MAS name and party as being a party that is linked to or associated with the president and the government, and not linked to Evo Morales. And they have tried through various means to make it impossible and to bar Evo from running as presidential candidate. But a lot of people still want to see Evo run as candidate for a lot of reasons. Some people from the different indigenous campesino sectors remember those 14 years of Evo Morales as being a time of prosperity and economic growth. And that's absolutely impossible to argue with. Everyone knows that those were glory years for Bolivia, because they were able, under Evo's government, to take a large number of the population out of poverty and extreme poverty. And they were able to fix a lot of things that had been wrong with the country, including begin to address the issue of systemic racism against indigenous people, and provide dignity to the average Bolivian person in a system where now in Bolivia they embrace the different nationalities, the different indigenous people and their languages and their customs and cultures. And it's very unique, even though Bolivia is, in crisis right now, compared to a lot of other countries. They're really able to preserve a great deal of their indigenous culture. And this is really important. In Bolivia, young people listen to Bolivian music. People of all ages, they listen to Bolivian music. They also listen to, Argentine music, Peruvian and Brazilian music. But I think it's very interesting coming from Central America, where I spend a lot of time. The Central America is very heavily influenced by the United States and U.S. culture and U.S. popular culture and Hollywood, and for a number of reasons, they've been able to preserve their culture in large part in Bolivia, and they're somewhat proud of it in a way that they weren't before Evo's years, and that's really important. And so these are some of the things that people think about when they think about Evo's years in power. That Evo was able to bring together some important strategic relationships with different countries, including Russia and China, and of course the ALBA countries. And Bolivia is a member of ALBA, the Bolivarian Alliance, which is essentially led by Venezuela. It was a creation of Hugo Chavez and Fidel Castro, and now it's President Nicolas Maduro who's carrying that torch. And so, you know, the Evo's bases would really like to see Evo run for the presidency once again in these elections in August. Right now, they would need a party in order to be able to inscribe in the elections. For the time being, the name of that party or the vehicle is Frente para la Victoria. It's FPV, but the name of the political instrument, as was decided in the Congress, is Evo Pueblo. So it's two different things. Evo Pueblo is what is essentially going to be replacing what was known as the MAS, and that was decided over 3 days of really intense debates and about 27 or more commissions or working tables, which were very fascinating to watch. But they'll be using the name Frente para la Victoria to run in the elections. If in fact Evo is able to go and inscribe, that would require him to go to La Paz and register with the TSE. Right now, there is a warrant for his arrest, and he hasn't left the Tropico of Cochabamba. And the Tropico of Cochabamba is where Evo lives, and it's where pretty much everyone supports him and is a part of the mega union of campesinos that is a very important part of the political instrument. But the political instrument also has representation and organizations from all 9 departments of the country. And all of them came to Villa Tunari. They came to the Tropico of Cochabamba for this massive 3-day Congress. There are about 100,000 people who participated in essentially forming a new political instrument. It's really difficult to say party because it's not really the same as a party. It is a political party in that they would, it would be from that party that they would launch candidates in the different elections, be it, on a municipal level or for the presidency or anything else. But at the same time, it's supposed to be the political instrument that's supposed to be guiding the policies of the national government. And it also requires a lot of commitment from the organizations and the membership, because they are really supposed to be participating in all of the meetings and all of the congresses and all of the decision making. And that's what we saw this weekend. The process included these 27 commissions that talked about what they wanted to have the new political instrument have as its policies in the areas of agriculture and the areas of mining, having to do with technology, biotech, having to do with artificial intelligence, and many other economic sectors that are important. On the second day, which was the main day of a full day of the commissions or the working tables, I mean, the meetings begin at like 6 in the morning and they go until like 1 in the morning. It's almost 24 hours that there are different meetings taking place. And Evo was going around, and that's in some of the photos I sent, I believe, and he visited each one of the 27 commissions. I believe it was 27. It might have been a few more. There was also a commission that was dedicated to the structure of the organization, the structure of the leadership, how we choose what representatives come from the different organizations, from the different departments, from the different regions. So it's extremely intense. So Evo usually first would hear from a representative or a speaker from the commission, talk about what the commission had been discussing in the days and hours before, and then Evo would speak a little bit about what he thought about the issue. An example is that I don't know what the actual commission was called, but I walked into a commission to film, and there were a couple of different people who stood up and told Evo what they thought about the airports in the country and how they see this necessity to maintain the airports. One of the demands that they had was that every department in the country needs to have an international airport, with regular flights, international flights. And this is important for the economy. It's important to boost tourism. Tourism was another one of the commissions. They said, Bolivia is a country that needs to be boosting tourism more, and we need to be able to get that revenue. There's the sign for it there. And so at the end, these commissions each make a number of points or resolutions to vote on in the big plenary session. And so people vote en masse. They vote by holding up their credential, essentially. And but before they take a vote, there's a last opportunity for someone to take the microphone and add an additional point. Sometimes these presentations for each one of the 27 commissions can take a very long time. There was one night that I stayed up till about 2 a.m. I had left the Congress and went back to my room, but I was still streaming it, and it just went on too late, and I knew I had to be up at 6 a.m. I don't know how these people are able to do it 24 hours. As you know, everyone chews coca in the campesino rural areas of Bolivia, and so they were just debating all night and making decisions, and it does become contentious. In fact, in the background of some of my interviews that I filmed, there are actually people yelling and whistling and almost getting into physical altercations, which is really interesting because these are really important decisions that are being made, and it can be really contentious, trying to decide who among the different social movement leaders is going to represent these organizations. Ultimately, on the final day of the Congress, for this new political instrument, they had to designate representatives from these key social movements, and one from each of the 9 departments to sit on the executive directive board, which is the first executive directive board of this new political instrument, which is Evo Pueblo. So we're really just seeing the founding of a new political organization. And so, it's extraordinarily interesting to be able to observe that and to see how that process takes place. Probably to the average person, they look at the images of Bolivia and they just see a bunch of brown indigenous people. It is important to say that among the people who are there, a lot of them are campesinos, they are indigenous, but a lot of them are academics and intellectuals and professionals and people from all over the country. Some of them are business people, some of them are very key actors in the Bolivian economy who, under Evo Morales' government, or in the last 20 years, maybe even now, were able to help the government secure really important international contracts in different countries or sell their products, whatever it be, cacao, coffee, to other countries. So they have that link with the government because the government does rely on these business people and their companies and their products. And so they all want to have a say in this new political instrument. And some of them have said, we really want to see Evo Morales back in the government. And if he does, we want to be a key part of forming those policies and advising him and advising the government and making sure that we're able to bring this country out of the economic crisis and the political crisis that it's currently in.
Thank you so much for that really comprehensive report back from this conference. I have some more questions that are related to it. But just the images that we were seeing on screen and just the image that you paint of this conference, there's this tendency, within the United States, or what Bolivians call Gringolandia, to paint somebody like Evo Morales as a dictator or an authoritarian. But the process you're talking about sounds very democratic. This is what democracy actually looks like. You can just walk up to government officials, candidates. You can hold the mic. Here in the United States, there's these town hall meetings that, you know, that used to happen. You know, there's this kind of romanticized image of democracy and how it happens. And people are complaining, political candidates are complaining because people are coming there and disrupting them and telling them they don't like what's going on with the government. So they stopped having them. You can't even walk in most government buildings, you know, without getting accosted and things like that. So it shows you the kind of the level of access that everyday people have to their political candidates, but that it's not just somebody like Evo Morales. It's, you know, Evo Pueblo, which is, you know, he's the people. He himself is an instrument. And also the, you know, the movements or the organizations that you're describing too. It's very disciplined. You have to be, as far as I know, to be a part of this, you have to be part of a social movement or a union. And people are represented as collectives, not necessarily as individuals, when they go into this process. And so very much, you know, this is what democracy looks like. And as you said, it is very historic, and it has gone largely unreported and unremarked upon in the Western and corporate media sphere. So I really appreciate, you know, you going in and being, you know, with the people, with the movements, and documenting firsthand what is going on. I don't think there's a journalist like you who does the work that you do, and so we are getting, you know, we're very privileged to have you on. So that was just
Thank
a really
you.
amazing, yeah, it was just a really amazing report back.
Thank you. And just to remark on that, I mean, it's worrisome almost to me the amount of access that regular people have had to these high officials, because I have seen people go to Evo and other leaders. Leonardo Losa, for example, he's a senator, and they go to them with some of the most local issues. I don't want to say they're unimportant issues, but they're talking about their fishing business, which is, you know, could be very small scale, or that they need a bridge to be able to, you know, take their product to the city or whatever it is. And on the one hand, you would think, doesn't Leonardo have um, assistants or secretaries or someone who could, you know, take a note down and take a phone number, or I don't know, like an email or something? But at the same time, the fact that they allow someone to come up to them and sometimes schedule a meeting with them and tell them about all these problems means that they are politicians, although they're, you know, much more than that. They have a really good idea, because they've been in the government for so long as well, of how things work on every level. And they're very much connected to the people on the rural countryside, but also in the cities. And so they have a great deal of expertise in a lot of areas. And you have to think, Evo came from the countryside. He is an indigenous person who came from a very small town. I've been to his home where I've been to his home where he was born and where he grew up, and I've also been to where he lives now. And it's pretty amazing that someone from such a humble background was able to uh, become president and be reelected and govern over, you know, an entire country. So I'm sure it was a huge learning curve for him, but I think he is much smarter than people understand. And he has a lot of experts and advisors around him that that will allow him to really guide and direct the country if he's able to govern once again. And, you know, these social leaders are essentially local governors in their own right, anyways, because um, just to wrap up this one point, I mean, this country is experiencing an economic crisis, and we can talk about that later on. But right now, in the Tropico of Cochabamba, where Evo lives, you know, they're all affected by the things that are happening in the country. But at the same time, things are still booming and
mhm.
moving. You know, economically, people are buying things. People work from 4 a.m. You know, early in the morning before the light is even out. It's actually a huge contrast from the city. In the city, people are really hurting, but in the rural area, where of course, you know, there's things are not developed and they're not what we would want them to be, but you know, people are very hardworking, and they're finding ways to keep the economy up. And some of the towns in the rural area have really grown, have gotten a good deal of new infrastructure. And so there's a little bit of things to be optimistic about in that sense. And because they have their own economic motors, and they have, and a great part of that is because, people aren't starving, of course, because they grow their own food. It's a country that's largely food sovereign, and they're continuing to do that and work on the land.
Yeah, that's really important context. Yeah, let's jump into that economic crisis, because it's also a political crisis. I think maybe the last time we had you on was after the coup and the restoration of democracy in Bolivia, with the election, as you mentioned, of Luis Arce, or Lucho. And that's kind of taken a really dramatic turn, to say the least. Maybe you can give us a brief summary of his time in power, what has happened. There's been some pretty major controversies, especially around this, what some people are calling like an auto coup or an auto golpe, that happened last summer, in June of 2024. It got a little bit of press coverage, but it was so confusing. The outcomes of it were very confusing. There was a lot of kind of back and forth between the Arce faction of MAS, and then the Evo faction of MAS. And it's gotten really ugly, to the point where there's been attempts on Evo Morales's life, as well as this new round of accusations that have led to an arrest warrant. But maybe you can just walk us through these kind of broader economic shifts and how they play into the broader political climate. Because I think, if I remember correctly, Arce kind of came into power promising a restoration not only of democracy, but continuing the sort of political path that was carved out by MAS. But what we saw was a lot of capitulation towards the golpistas, or the people who actually tried to overthrow the government. We saw, yes, there was the arrest and trials of Yanin Áñez, but yet a lot of the politicians still remained in power, who were part of trying to overthrow the government. But maybe you can talk a little bit about what the last 4 or 5 years has looked like under the Arce government.
So the the difficulties have largely arisen in the economy in the last 2 years. And it's in the last 2 years that the split has really consolidated. That's largely the time in which I've been out of Bolivia. And things have become really difficult because, um, Lucho, Luis Arce, came to the government. And for a number of reasons, they thought that it would be wise to put in new people in the ministries. They did not bring back the same leaders, the same ministers as Evo had in government. Those people, Evo's ministers, were all persecuted. Some of them went and had to hide or take refuge in the Mexican embassy. Some of them left the country for Mexico or Argentina. Others were hiding in their homes. And so it was a very difficult time. But when that ended, with the return of democracy and the elections that took place in November or October 2020, they were able to return, but they didn't return to what had formerly been their post. So we saw, Lucho, Luis Arce, the criticism of him was that he was putting people in the ministries that were not really part of the political instrument. They weren't really from the bases, and they weren't really representative of the organizations. They were sometimes others who were professionals from La Paz, by and large. They were from the city. And because this is the largest political party or political organization in Bolivia's history, it's absolutely massive. It has had its wings. And this is the case in all countries, especially, in Latin America. I've observed it absolutely everywhere. When you have a massive political party like this, or a massive movement, you have all sorts of different people with different ideas and different ideologies. It's very rare in Latin America today to see a very strict line that is enforced and that is held by everyone. So I'm not saying this is good or bad. This is just the fact. that when you have a movement that's so strong and you have a leader at its head that is so charismatic and moves so many people to join, you get all sorts of people who, of course, they're not part of any organization. And so they represent all sorts of different interests sometimes. And this has been a criticism of Evo, is that he allowed some of those people to have too much power in his government, and that he allowed too many of these people to advise him at times. And all of this essentially played a part in the fact that he, didn't see or wasn't able to prevent the coup from taking place in 2019, and that he gave his full endorsement and backing and resources to getting Luis Arce elected as president in 2020, who went on to be what everybody is now calling a Lenin Moreno, Lenin Moreno referring to the president who was elected in April of 2017 in Ecuador, who succeeded Rafael Correa, but turned out to be a huge backstabber and actually turned out to be a US puppet president, a neoliberal president who came in with IMF reforms and austerity and attacked the social movements and the public radios and everything else. That's what they're saying Luis Arce is doing in Bolivia. And so, since since this split, there have been a number of difficulties. Some of the, speaking of media, some of the public media that had been funding and received a little bit of support from the governments was identified as being avista, or in support of Evo and Evo's movement, and the government ceased to give them any more money or contracts because they wanted, all the public media to support the government. Right now, basically, the public media supports the government, and it's only these small grassroots media outlets that are with the social movements. The world is facing crisis and economic crisis, and there's a lot of issues that many countries are dealing with, but it has been particularly a difficult time for Bolivia. 2 years ago, if you followed my reporting in Kawsachun News, you know that Bolivia was a country that wasn't impacted by inflation around the world. They were still able to maintain really low prices on things and keep things affordable, including fuel, including energy, including food and basic necessities. Today, people tell me, people in Bolivia, other journalists, I would say journalists who are not particularly pro-Evo or anything, basically everyone knows that the prices have risen 30%. And according to the government, in 2024, the prices rose 10%, or saw 10% inflation. I mean, these are two different stories, but it seems apparent that they have gotten really, things have gotten really expensive, the basic basket. And this is going to only worsen because right now there is a fuel crisis. There are 5-hour-long lines to get gas in different parts of the country. I was in the city of Cochabamba, and it was 5 hours. My friend, a woman, she told me that she sent her teenage son to go take the car to get gas, and he was there for the first 5 hours of the day, and he didn't get gas, and that's in the city of Cochabamba. 5 hours later, or a 5-hour drive from there in the rural area of the Tropico of Cochabamba, there are also really long lines. So it's in the city, it's in the rural area. I asked why this is. I was told, some people told me that it's because the government is not importing what's necessary, and that this is because there are no dollars in Bolivia for imports, and that the Boliviano, which the currency lacks the backing to maintain its official value, and then that they have devaluation of the Boliviano currency, and because of that, there's a different price of exchange between, there's a difference between the official exchange rate and the price at which the dollar can be obtained on the streets. Banks don't have dollars. International observers are in the red. certified gold held by the central bank and backed by the Boliviano is also below 50% of the amount it had been under Evo. And so these people, people who remember Evo's days have said that that under Luis Arce, the country has been bankrupted and things are only going to get worse. But so the fuel situation is going to impact a lot of things. And so what people have told me, speaking to the delegates at this Congress, is that with all of these factors, the government is losing legitimacy, what legitimacy it had left. And interestingly enough, if you're following, Bolivian politics, even in the mainstream media, you'll see that some of the actors that we've come to know from the right wing have already launched themselves and declared themselves as presidential candidates. But for some reason, it's important to say too that at the same time that we celebrated the 30 years of the political instrument in Villa Tunari in the Tropico of Cochabamba with Evo and those historic leaders, Luis Arce had a parallel Congress in La Paz, which was also celebrating 30 years of the MAS, and which also had some representation of social movements. But in the end of that Congress, he did not declare himself a candidate, and that is the result of perceived lack of support, where they're beginning to have these discussions after a series of polls, which I don't believe in these polls anyways, but it's the general feeling, and it's also the polls that point to the fact that Luis Arce doesn't have sufficient support to launch himself as presidential candidate in these August elections, and that perhaps those people who support this government and want to see these set of people remaining in power might need to think of another person to launch as candidate. So as you can see, this is a huge problem that the right and the far right are sure about who they want to run as presidential candidates. It's people who've all run before, who have their own bases and their own departments or the part of the country in which they're influential, and also the business sectors that they're a part of. But the left, apart from Evo, they say that they don't want Evo to run once again, that he's someone who they actually have no alternative, and they're exceptionally weak. And the problem with that is obviously that as fractured as they are and as divided as things have become, it's really going to break down the vote. And in the first round, it's possible that a left-wing politician could come out in first place. But in a second round, the right could really consolidate because they do have some support in the country, and they could potentially win. So it's a really dangerous situation if the left doesn't come together, and that's what seems what's happening.
Yeah, you mentioned that for Evo Morales to even register as a candidate, he has to leave his home and go to La Paz, and that's a dangerous prospect for him. And I just I don't know what, if you got any information or idea or suggestions about how he's going to actually file as a candidate if he can't even leave his territory without fear of arrest.
I tried to ask a number of people this question, and there's no answer at this time. So I mean, this is probably one of the biggest questions that's that I'm trying to figure out, because I think it would require a set of negotiations. They have said at the end of this Congress, that took place this weekend, they as part of the resolutions, they said that we have one singular candidate. We're unified behind this candidate. That candidate is Evo Morales. He will run in the elections. They said that they're going to do everything necessary, fulfill all their requirements with the electoral organ to and ensure that they can participate electorally. But I still don't know how that's going to take place. I would like to know personally, so that I could be in the country and follow that when it takes place. So, you know, Evo, has some charges against him, and on a number of occasions, primarily two different large events took place in which there was one very large march last year that was like La Marcha por la Vida to La Paz to make demands of the government. Then there were some protests that were shutting down the roads, blocking the roads in protest of the government. That was never Evo's idea. It was the grassroots. Evo was actually hoping for it to stop because he saw a lot of danger, and he saw that the police were about to use repression, and they did. They have 120 political prisoners from this uprising, from these roadblocks that took place, and so it's really difficult because we have a little bit of a human rights situation again, where it's not properly documented who was disappeared, who was injured, and all the different, the abuses that took place with the police. And at the same time, we don't really know the state of the different cases and the charges against the political prisoners who are being held in La Paz, very far away from the where they're from, which is they're from a small, by and large, they're from a small town called Paratani, which is just halfway, let's say, between the city of Cochabamba and this interior rural part where the Congress was held. And so those people need to be released. And so we know that there is a concerted effort to try to repress this movement. So it's going to be really dangerous, I think, for Evo if he is to now leave to leave the region and go to La Paz to try to meet with the TSE or inscribe in the elections. And it has been said that a lot of the political persecution from the government has come from the interior minister, which is like the ministro de gobierno, minister of government, and that this ministry has ties to the U.S. Embassy and with the DEA. And what took place with the assassination attempt against Evo Morales was actually an attempt to arrest him and take him to La Paz and extradite him to the United States. And so that's really difficult to hear, because it means that his life is really in danger. They want to hand him over to the US for a bunch of fake crimes. Of course, the United States likes to call leftist leaders narco traffickers. They've done this in every country of Latin America, literally. And they've tried to forge these ideas of links to narco trafficking, and that's ultimately what they're going to try to get him on. And so it's going to be very difficult for him to run as candidate. But even if he were unable to run as candidate, everything that's taken place in the last few days, and actually the meetings began before the Congress, there was a lot of preparatory work, is very important, because it's the continuation of the movement. It's the continuation of this struggle, even if whoever runs ends up losing. I spoke to these historic leaders of the political instrument of the left in Bolivia, and they have said that Evo Morales today is, he's the bearer of that same, struggle against colonialism and now imperialism that was led by and exemplified by other indigenous leaders in the past, including Tupac Katari and Bartolina Sisa. And that's really what they're preserving. That's really what they're carrying on. And not everything is elections, and the bases know that. They know that there's a lot of work to be done in organizing and bringing about conscience to the majority of Bolivians, not just taking state power. It'll be a huge loss if they lose the presidency or they're not able to win other elections in the Congress or whatever else. But there's really a lot of organizing that needs to take place, and they need to kind of figure out how to proceed given all of the difficulties that are being faced today.
Yeah, it sounds like a really dire situation. And just to kind of put some of this into context too, I think there's this idea that Evo Morales has won't loosen his grip on power, and he should just retire, and and it's ironic because the outgoing president of the United States spent 50 years in office and nobody ever asked him to retire. It's like, it's kind of ironic that there's this double standard if you have a different color skin or you're below, a certain sort of latitude in in the globe, or you're from a different country. So this idea that like somehow, Evo Morales is, has outlived his, or has, overstayed his sort of welcome in politics, is really just flies in the face of the fact that there's so much support for him. And it is a very sort of dire situation because it was the Trump administration who did back the coup against Evo Morales, and Moss, and helped, push the country into the crisis that it was in under the coup government, but then also, no doubt, would love to, extract him from that particular context and put him on trial, as you said, to charge him as a narco terrorist, as they've, as the United States government has put bounties on Nicolas Maduro, and many leaders in the Bolivarian Revolution to delegitimize them, in the eyes of the world. Meanwhile, we know where, if we know we know who the real, narco terrorists are, and they're not in Latin American countries. But yeah, this I wanted to ask a little bit about, the current situation, the geopolitical situation with Alba, and the new threats and the attacks, from the Trump administration on, not just, the Bolivarian Revolution, but Latin America in general, and where you see, or where people are kind of seeing, Bolivia and playing, an important role, and what role can international solidarity with, this revolutionary process in Bolivia play in help securing, and protect this. I think Sina wants to play, a video of the assassination attempt that he sent real quick. Why don't you play that, Sina, and I'll ask the question. I'll rephrase the question to Camila.
Bien, cerralo, cerralo. Avanza, dale, mapache, volando, volando. No, están aquí, chútalo. Presi, baja y se sube volando. Están disparándonos, están detenidos, rápido, moviliza, rápido. Están disparando. Presi, volando, volando, volando. ¡Vamos! Se van picando, pista negra, no está carro amplio, van a la llanta, se ha quedado y cambiado de llanta. Conocemos, estamos llegando a Chinata. Sí, son ellos. Sí, se han parado en el surtidor. ¿Qué tienen ustedes? Nos han perseguido.
Can you, maybe just describe, what we just watched, and that scene?
Yeah. I mean, I have a lot of context and information to that because I lived there and I know where it took place and everything like that. An assassination attempt or some effort to try to capture Evo Morales and take him to La Paz, took place, and maybe it went wrong, and that's why they started shooting at the car, at the windshield, even injuring the driver. And the story of the government just really doesn't add up in any way. And what Evo has concluded is that this was some sort of effort to capture him carried out by government intelligence. Behind it would be the interior minister, and that the government is trying to say that it was some sort of almost either a routine traffic stop or an attempt to make a seizure of something having to do with anti-narco operation. But they're saying all sorts of things. It has never made sense. But also this area, this rural area, has very specific checkpoints. Like the whole country has very specific checkpoints that you go through, police, military, And there's no operation there. That was a very irregular thing that took place. And then the perpetrators or the people who were involved in that, they went and hid in the in the barracks of the security forces, and then they were airlifted out. They were protected. There's been no real investigation into it. It's just completely absurd. No one even tries to make excuses for that happening. And so, Evo knows that he has to be very careful. And there have been a number of other incidents as well in which some of the social leaders have been killed or attacked very recently, which is very scary for them. And of course, added to the political prisoners and everything else, the repression that they faced, they are very, right now, they're very aware and careful with what they do. But I think it needed to have been a wake-up call. I can't say that it was a wake-up call, but it needed to have been a wake-up call, I would say, for Friends of Bolivia and for people who support this movement, because there has been a really strong pressure for people to remain neutral and to not support, either the government or not support Evo Morales and the social movements that support him, because they don't want to be, outside actors, whether they be social movements around South America or whoever it is. They don't want to be part of the division or the fracturing, and they just want to support everything. I mean, that's not particularly helpful to me. I see Evo Morales and the leaders around him, among them, Adriana Salvatierra. She's from Santa Cruz. She was a former senator persecuted during the coup. Teresa Morales, she was a former congressperson. All these people as being really important leaders for the social movements in Latin America in general. But also, we have really lacked leadership in our region against, leadership that can face against, rising fascism, against the different ways that imperialism has manifested and is attacking the people and our countries. And, one of the most important leaders is Nicolas Maduro. And another most important leader, I think I see Nicolas Maduro as someone who is leading governments. He's at the head of ALBA TCP. He is leading the fight against fascism worldwide, bringing people together from Africa, Europe, Asia, Latin America, and even North America together to see how we can confront fascism together. But Evo Morales truly is a leader for indigenous people and social movements still today. And when all of these different things have happened, in Ukraine, the proxy war against Russia, with Gaza and everything else, it's Evo who has had a really sharp and rapid response to these things in terms of putting out ideas and making sure that we're all on the same page about what's taking place. But what is unique to Evo is that he is someone who has spoken extensively about protecting our natural resources. In the case of Bolivia, that's largely lithium and energy resources and the biodiversity that exists in the country. And he has said, as have all the people who attended this Congress, that in order to protect the Bolivian people and their rights and ensure prosperity in the future and guarantee a future for the next generations, that they have to be able to reserve the right to exploit their own natural resources and be able to use their resources to benefit the people of the country, to invest, to make public investment and make sure that those earnings are used for things that improve the lives of the people of Bolivia, so that money is not that those resources aren't extracted from the country, and the money extracted as well by these transnational corporations and these wealthy individuals, and just which would be the continuation of the ransacking and looting that we've seen for hundreds of years from our countries. And basically Evo has a way of tying everything that takes place the ransacking of our countries and our lands. But it's true. And and you can see, like, Bolivia is a prime example of that. Argentina is another example of that. You can see why they want to have certain leaders in power, because they know that they're going to sign over the rights to all of the resources of the country to foreign companies, for them to come and do whatever they want at a very low price, actually. And the people of this land get nothing in return. And so I think that's a very important perspective that Evo has, that he has given us, is that he's saying, like, things are changing in the world. We don't know how long our civilization is going to last or whatever, but we have to ensure things for our people, and we have to do that by protecting our lands, and by ensuring the sovereignty of our countries and our resources. And so I really think that it's time for people to wake up and see that this is a very important leader who's under attack, who has lent a lot to, I think, even the thinking of social movements and leftist parties. In every country, everyone has a different way of characterizing the left. In some countries, it's really important that they talk about themselves as communists, our socialist revolution, our socialist project, whatever. In Bolivia, it is a socialist project. That's why they call it the Movement Towards Socialism. That was the name of the former political instrument. And they do believe in socialism, but it is largely, the sort of, what characterizes the movement is more of like, of an understanding of and perspective of being indigenous, and protecting the land, and protecting your culture and heritage, and along with that, embracing the communitarian model and socialism and all of that. So it's a lot of different aspects. But I think it's important to say that, the movement that Evo's a part of, as well as the strong indigenous movement in Ecuador and in Peru, that they have like a sort of different approach to things. So we call them the left, just to be able to simplify things, because they're certainly not right wing. But it is, they have that perspective of, we have experienced genocide, we have been wiped out, we've been dispossessed, we've been displaced, and it's a process which continues. And the only thing that has brought us dignity and has prevented this from deepening is the fact that we've been able to continue struggling. And in some sense, in the case of Bolivia, they actually were able to take state power. In the case of Ecuador, they do have some indigenous people representing in government in different forms. And so that's what we're talking about here. Like, these are large communities of indigenous people who are continuing to fight back as imperialism progresses, and as war breaks out and conflict in different parts of the world. They're still trying to hold it down here, and they've been in many ways successful. It's very impressive, and it just has so many lessons to teach us.
Yeah, for sure. And also, it's important to mention that the Venezuelan constitution mandates that there are indigenous representatives in their National Assembly. And I think beyond the 3 that are mandated, they are overrepresented. They have over 20, I think, indigenous representatives in their National Assembly. But it shows that indigenous people and indigenous movements are not just a sort of tack-on struggle to these larger state socialist projects, but they are fundamentally part of that. They're integrated into it to a degree that you can't separate them, right? And I think people think that, like, oh, when we're sanctioning, Venezuela, we're sanctioning the government. It's like, no, you're actually sanctioning indigenous people. I've been to the southern regions of Bolivar and seen what sanctions actually do to indigenous people. So it's important to remember that, like, the U.S. Indian policy isn't just circumscribed by its own national boundaries, but it's extended to the rest of Latin America as well, through the forms of sanctions. And I just want to play this clip because I love this clip from Evo Morales, who was at the UN Security Council speaking directly to Donald Trump. And I want to contrast this clip of Evo with the clip that we saw of Zelensky basically groveling at the feet of Donald Trump in the White House Oval Office. So Sina, can you cue up the clip that I just? Okay, we'll just watch it. It's a short one.
The United States could not care less about human rights nor justice. If this were the case, it would have signed the international conventions and treaties for the protection of human rights. It would not have threatened the investigation mechanisms of the International Criminal Court, nor would it promote the use of torture, nor would it have walked away from the Human Rights Council, and nor would it have separated migrant children from their families, nor put them in cages.
Yeah, it's part of a longer speech. I recommend everyone go and look it up. But it's he just lays out a laundry list of the things that the United States is engaging in that's contravening international law, and this idea that it's somehow bringing spreading democracy and freedom to the world. But he's saying it directly to Trump. Trump is sitting, to his, I think it's to his right, at the UN at that time, and just like fuming over the fact that this indigenous peasant is sitting there sticking the middle finger essentially to the US empire, but doing it with dignity, doing it with repose, doing it representing a sovereign nation that's saying we're not going to be just a chain in the imperialist supply chain. We're not going to bow down to your dictates. We're going to nationalize our resources for the benefit of our people. We're going to create and carve out our own form of social development that reflects not just the values of Western liberal democracy, but that reflects the actual people who make up Bolivia, which is the cultures of indigenous Andean people. So I really like that example, because it shows you, even in the face of repression, even in the face of constant threats of coup, Evo Morales, and representing the movements that he represents, held dignity and brought dignity back. And I think that doesn't resonate in Bolivia. That resonates throughout the rest of the world, especially in this moment when there's so much cowering and so much fear. If you want to reflect on that piece, but also maybe talk about this current moment, because you're in Argentina right now, and the Milei government is chainsawing the state and chainsawing the social services and the advances that were made by left movements in the country, and how that sort of reverberates right now in this moment with Donald Trump, Elon Musk, and their policies.
Yeah, I think the model is very the model of Bolivia under Evo Morales, or since Evo Morales' government, but even the movement that he leads, is just so important for other countries. It's important, and we hear this all the time from the compañeros y compañeras de Peru, from Ecuador, and some of the pictures that I sent to Sina, which he put up at one point, there's a bunch of flags from different countries, and that's because part of this Congress was that there were people from there were people representing many different countries that came and supported. They were not really they weren't delegates. They didn't participate in any of the working groups. They kind of had their own side meetings and things. But there's this sort of solidarity committee with Evo. These solidarity committees with Evo that have been founded in different countries, among them Argentina, Brazil, Peru, Ecuador, and Honduras was one of the main countries, and Chile. And they put on a workshop where they connected all of the struggles in these different countries to the process unfolding in Bolivia. It was actually a workshop about lawfare. Each one of them, I don't know if I said Argentina, but I should have, of course, talked about how lawfare has affected largely, the leftist politicians in their countries, and those who tried to make changes in their countries, and how those people were lawfared just the way that Evo is being lawfared, and they were hit with a bunch of different charges and cases incessantly until they were almost, unable to participate politically anymore. And so that was really important. But the context of each one of these countries is very distinct. But to talk about like the indigenous movement in Ecuador and compare it to the indigenous movement in Bolivia, everyone is observing like prices go up, shortages, the inflation, the difficulty when, there's major world events and things like that. And they're also seeing, the degradation of the environment and the threats that could bring along, in terms of like climate disasters and things like that, and obviously drought and everything else. And they're just saying the only thing that we have for sure is our resources and our ability to farm and grow our own food, produce our own food, hopefully be able to export some of that food and all of those things. So we need to protect, what's around us, what's real, while also advancing and technologically, while also learning about how to best use AI and all of those things in our countries and our communities. But I think I mean, I've heard countless times from these different social leaders who have come, indigenous leaders who've come from the different parts of Peru and from Ecuador to Bolivia, just to learn from the process. So I think I don't know how we apply that in such a different context, like let's say North America, but I know that there are lessons to learn. And what was the other part of the question that you asked?
Looking at like what's happening in Argentina right now with Milei.
Yeah. So, well, I mean, the far right in the world is actually praising him for what he's doing to dismantle the state and nationalizing the industries in Bolivia is actually what led to the prosperity and all the growth throughout all of those years. It goes without saying that what's happening here is the total dismantling of the state because the ideology that this president of Argentina promotes and subscribes to is libertarianism, and he believes that what Argentina needs is free market. It needs to be open. It needs to liberalize its economy, allow for foreign investment and these transnationals to come in and do whatever they want with the country, whether it's make very easy, quick deals to exploit resources and leave a little bit of money in Argentina, take most of it out, but to access all of these things, and at the same time, they're scrapping essential public services. And what happens every Wednesday here for many months now is that the pensioners, the retired people, go out to the streets and they protest against the loss of their pension. It's very difficult. They're receiving very little money. They don't have enough to survive. That means that you have elderly people without any social rights, without any protections, and people who are going to be working at a very old age. And it's really quite sad. And I think that that's really, for me, very inspiring as well, that they are so adamant about going every Wednesday, because this this is all coming to a head. And I know that everyone is really upset about what's taking place here. And so next Thursday, which is April 10th, there's going to be a national strike that is being led by the main unions of the country. That's very important. That will include students and all sorts of different workers and whatnot. But the consistent protest has been every Wednesday. Sometimes it has had support of different social movements and things, but largely, most consistently has been the pensioners. And, what's going to happen is you're going to see big deficiencies in health and education, which are two of the most important areas, but in other areas as well. And you're going to see rising crime and everything else. And so that is where, the United States and people there stand to learn from what's going on here, because although unfortunately the Argentine people did elect Milei, he didn't just, come to power through a coup or anything like that. Through a lot of propaganda and misinformation and a lot of dissatisfaction with the political center left, people, they couldn't get behind a good, strong leftist candidate, and so Milei came to power through, what we would call democratic elections. And similarly, people did legitimately as they can in a very illegitimate political system in the U.S. They did vote for Trump. Given the limitations of that system, and you can't argue with that. People did not want the Democrats, nor is there any other alternative. And so I know that people are already looking to Argentina to see, how things are going to develop in the United States, but you're already seeing it there as well. It's absolutely horrible, but I don't know that Argentina, even with its money, is not worth anything. I mean, this is a problem that, precedes Milei, but is going to only worsen. As bad as things are here, it's even worse in other countries that have followed the U.S. dictates, such as Ecuador, where crime is just pretty much the worst almost in the world. It has the highest homicide rate anywhere in Latin America. A lot of Ecuadorians have gone to the United States or who have sought to migrate elsewhere. And that country is being completely run by transnational criminal organizations. The prisons are run by the cartels. The cartels have fully infiltrated the government. And this is all being done while the United States is operating within the Ecuadorian government and is advising the government. Now it's actually like a part of the government. We have these different agencies all on the ground in Ecuador as Ecuador prepares for an election to be held a week from Sunday. That should be April 13th, to elect a new president. And so they are absolutely destroying that country. It's kind of just another very extreme example of what happens when a country doesn't have sovereignty, and when there are politicians or governments who are elected who are not concerned with the people or sovereign policies. They're only concerned with fulfilling the mandate of their bosses in Washington. And so that's what we're seeing in Argentina, that's what we're seeing in Ecuador, and that's what we're seeing now, unfortunately, also in El Salvador, with that very close partnership between the government of Nayib Bukele and the United States. And we don't know how far that's going to go, and those human rights abuses are going to go, but the creation of that, what's being called like a carceral state, where there are, detention camps and all of that, is a very scary thing for our region. And it seems to have not really shaken the human rights industry, and there's not a lot of outrage about it in the places there should be. There's tons of outrage about it. It's pretty much like in the headlines everywhere. It's in all the mainstream media and everything. But it seems like nothing is ever going to be done in response to it because it's El Salvador. If it were Venezuela or Nicaragua or China, then it would be a completely different response.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, just to speak from the perspective of North America, there's a tendency on the left or in progressive movements to, put Bolivia, put Ecuador, put Venezuela, Nicaragua, Cuba under the microscope for their failures, while not recognizing or even building a legitimate or a significant political opposition to the crimes of our country. And I always go back to in Venezuela, somebody asked, I think from a North American delegation, what can we do to help you guys? And the response was like, why don't you start by having your own revolution? And it's true. It's like the way that we can improve be best in solidarity with those in the global South is to fix the issues within our own political system and social system. It means fighting, like, the best form of international solidarity and politics begins at the local level. And I think that we're seeing that right now. The absence of a political alternative in the United States, we get Trump, we get this carceral state that is expanding into Latin America, and the increased attacks on places, on left projects in places like Venezuela specifically, and Cuba. So I think the other part of it is to I remember I was on the ground during the elections for Andres Arauz and God, I can't remember the other guy's name, Lasso. And I remember the political propaganda that was coming out of the United States tying Arauz to Rafael Correa. Rafael Correa was this kind of like unrepentant racist against indigenous people, this and that, and these kind of like labels and depictions of the left in Latin America do a lot of political work in terms of how international solidarity is broken down, but it also paves the way for, as you're pointing out, this kind of right-wing authoritarianism to rise in service of the United States, to create client states, to create resource colonies, and to reintroduce the process of colonization, of European and North American colonization of Latin America. And so it's essential for us to actually know the facts on the ground. And no other person would I ever recommend more than following, Camila and her work. And I we're running out of time here, Camila, but at the end of this, live stream, at the end of this episode and this interview, can you tell us where to find your work, how to best support your reporting on the ground, and if listeners or viewers can make a financial contribution to any sort of projects that you're working on or uplifting, please let us know.
Yeah, I just found out that I could read the comments over here. I just clicked over to that tab, and so I'm like going through them because I wish I had read them as we were speaking. But my outlet is called Kawsachun News. I co-founded that in 2020, and I'm going to continue that with our website, which I'm constantly working to. We have a new website. It's Kawsachun.com. And it's really important that people know that that's the website, because there's also a website that has our old domain, which is Kawsachunnews.com, and it doesn't appear to actually pertain to anybody. It seems like someone bought our old domain because we stopped using it, and then they put like an AI site there. So it's not like a site that's competing with us, from what I can tell, but it seems like maybe they wanted me to buy that domain or something from them. So maybe that's why they bought it. But I decided for this Congress, there's a lot of things going on in the world. So I decided not to put out tweets. You didn't see me tweet about it. I didn't put anything on social media, because I do think that there's something to be said about, documenting these things, getting all of the interviews, and trying to create something that's a little more long form for people to understand, whether it be like a longer video that's edited, whether it be written. So I'm going to be doing that in the coming week, I believe, with all the materials that I was able to gather, because, if people are watching West Asia, if people are, seeing whatever scandal might have happened in the US during this time that I've been on the road, they won't be paying attention to Bolivia. And I think it's important to piece the things together and give greater context. So I'll be publishing my stuff on Kawsachun News. It's not, some of the things that I'm interested in that I've wanted to cover, which I have covered, have not been of particular importance to or interest to mainstream news outlets, nor alternative news outlets or other news outlets. That's why we had to start Kawsachun News, because there wasn't a place for it. And so it's not like Kawsachun News is going to become some big, huge alternative outlet that can compete with others or anything like that. But I think it's important that in the way that is possible, we be able to put out bits and pieces. And I've had a lot of collaborators and people help me along the way to get that information out. And I'm going to continue to try to do that through Kawsachun News. We're trying to boost the TikTok, because I think TikTok is a very important platform, although it's a very specific demographic, it turns out. Also, we're on Instagram. We do have a YouTube, and on X is usually where I would think people who follow you might also follow us. And we do have a patron, a Kawsachun News patron. And another thing that I wanted to mention, just to get a conversation started, is that I like being in the Tropico of Cochabamba. I spent time with some of my colleagues or former colleagues of Radio Kawsachun Coca, which is not it's not the same outlet as us. We're a different, we're a separate outlet. We did, you know, work. We did live there with them in that town of the Tropico. We are friends with them, but there's no formal connection at this stage. But Bolivia is in crisis. There's really it's very difficult to get a hold of dollars, and their money is worth far less than before. And we know a little bit of how things go when you face these sort of obstacles economically, in the case of Cuba, with obtaining technology and things like that. And our colleagues there, I mean, I call them colleagues, I mean, but they're not necessarily my coworkers in that sense. But you know, the journalists there who are grassroots, they do some really important reporting, and that is what allows me to know what's going on in the country when I'm not there. Same with Cuba, and these reporters and journalists, they don't have the best cell phones. They don't have the best, you know, personal computers for video editing and things like that. They have to go to the office on like shared computers and get a lot done. And I guess one of the things that I just want to pitch or propose or talk or see if anyone is interested in is some sort of project, because I know that we have some, you know, comrades and friends, for example, from Alliance for Global Justice, who recently had a delegation where they visited La Paz. They didn't leave the Department of La Paz, but they did some like agroecology type thing. And I know other people, friends of Bolivia, have gone and visited. And I think that there needs to be a way for us to pool resources, similar to the way in which we take donations when we go to Venezuela, when we go to Cuba, to donate these sorts of tools. Because as someone who works as a journalist and has myself never had the adequate amount of you know, money or resources or technology and things that I've needed, and that's me with, you know, all the people I know and all the connections I have. You know, I don't have like expensive camera lenses. It took me a really long time to get a camera, to get a computer that was enough to be able to edit these really heavy files. Like, it would be really good to, when we go to Bolivia, find ways of donating these things, because it really makes a difference. And you would be surprised how handy these people are. Like they almost, it's like they know more about how to use technology because they have less than us. They can do more with less. They're really good at, like, for example, buying subscriptions to things that only exist in Chile, for example, to be able to get different streams and different information. I mean, they're just very technologically savvy, but they don't have devices because they're so expensive. For example, if you wanted like to have iPhone quality, my iPhone is like quite old, like it's several generations old, but it's still far better quality than anything they have there. They would need to obtain US dollars. It would be very expensive. This means that they're out reporting on all sorts of different situations and national strikes and whatever else with the minimum. And so so this is just something that I want to put out there. You know, if there's any organization or somebody who wants to, you know, find out more about what the specific needs are, because because I have that information, and I know how hard it is to work without these necessary things. And I think the work that they do is so important. I've had the opportunity, like you said in the beginning, to be able to witness all these things and report on them on the ground. And, people have had a lot of confidence in me, or a lot of trust to let me into their spaces, even though I'm an outsider and I'm a complete outsider and beyond being a foreigner. But I don't have to go there because there's people who are doing this work on the ground. And so I would like for us to be able to find a way to facilitate that, because I think what they're doing is really incredible work. And I agree with all of the leaders that I spoke to while I was there, and the people who I interviewed and heard from, who said that this truly is, this is the legacy of all the important Indigenous leaders and people who have defended our lands and have resisted colonialism. And this is the work that they're doing. This is what we need to be supporting. I know that everybody is spread very thin with all the different causes and things that they have. That's part of why I'm not like posting on social media, because I know that what I think is important and what I want to draw attention to here in Latin America is not necessarily what everyone else thinks is the most important thing. The U.S. might be trying to create a war against Iran right now, or whatever it is. That's what everyone's paying attention to, and I understand that. So, but as far as the perspective from our part of the world, I think it's really important to support this stuff. And so, yeah, that's what I'm trying to figure out, like how to materially support the work that these guys do here. Because I can't be in Bolivia all the time. It's not my country. I'm not a Bolivian. I don't speak from a Bolivian perspective, but I do speak from a perspective of somebody who's Latin American and who derives so much inspiration from what they do.
Well, thanks so much for that, Camila. And I will just offer, the Red Media, our organization's support. We have supported, Indigenous media elsewhere. We have a sister podcast called Cuscaya, which is a Quechua language podcast from a lot of folks who hail from Peru. So, I'll make this commitment on air. Like, I'll bring this to our board and some of our comrades who know more about this. But if you could, after we get off the call, if you could give us some resources that we could help provide, would be more than happy to help with that campaign, with your guidance and with folks on the ground, what they need. But thank you so much, and we can get it out to our listeners and our viewers. But yeah, thank you so much for taking the time, and thank you for that last little bit, because I think it really tells you the stakes of this and like why it's important to have this kind of genuine and authentic reporting on the ground. And you can't get it anywhere else. It's the real deal, folks.
And I mean, I appreciate that people like hearing from me and like inviting me to their podcast and stuff like that. But I really, I'm so glad that I have like a platform to be able to put people's sound bites and interviews on, because I think it's better to hear it from those people, and they're better at saying it and explaining it. And they're, as far as me, I'm like in one month I'm following Venezuela's elections, and I'm following a coup somewhere else. And so, I'm a resource, but I'm not the resource. They are. And so I'm really excited to get that information out. I know it's not going to be the sexiest, most thrilling thing going on in the world, but I hope people watch it. So you'll be able to find it on our social media on Kawsachun News.
Well, thanks so much again, Camila.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much for following Bolivia so closely when so many other outlets and platforms are not particularly interested until the coup takes place or whatever. So thanks for getting that information out. I don't know where else we'll be getting out information about Bolivia. So it's much appreciated.